My name is Jeff Klein. I'm a 20-year resident.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
I have a follow-up on what Carol said about the historical radiological assessment supplementary tech memo that was finalized. It was introduced in 2011, it was finalized in 2014. At that point, so in 2012, there were 577 radioactive objects found. I believe the 2014 STM, the object list that got up to about 800. Is that correct? Or is it just
still
the
was
highest?
around the 500?
It was still like a little over
Sorry,
600.
I didn't get his correct answer. It's somewhere around the...
Somewhere around that number, yeah.
Around a little over 600 then.
Correct.
You said at a meeting last year that there were 1,280 radioactive objects.
Correct.
That's right.
So your STM is considered finalized with 600 radiological objects. TIDAS expert told the Board of Supervisors that they found 95%, Bob Burns told the Board of Supervisors they found 95% of the radiological objects back in 2012, December 2012, and you found another 700 objects. How can you consider your STM to be complete? And then there's the question of
So
water.
let's stop at that question. And either, is that something that you have an answer to
Oh,
now,
sure,
or do you need
definitely.
to get back to?
Definitely, and so it's a valid point. The primary purpose of that document was to evaluate more sites for evaluation. So it didn't necessarily say this is everything we've ever found and we'll never find anything again. It expanded the evaluation of the sites, including all of Site 12, for further evaluation. And as a result, as Carol mentioned, 5 years later, we've done a lot of investigation and found those additional items.
Okay, so my next question is related to that. I was just looking at the Site 12 trenching report from 2004, and where they dug 576 pits, trenches, and they talked about the water table being around 4 feet below ground level. But in some areas, it perched up to 1.6 feet below ground surface. And we all know that radiation gamma doesn't even penetrate through water. That's why they use the reactors to protect against radiation. How do you know that you're able to find the radioactive objects with a surface scan, gamma surface scan, when you have such a high and variable water table? And related question is, the most highly radioactive objects are these foils, the 8-sided foils in particular, about 14 millimeters across. I have reason to believe they are from an instrument called a Navy Metascope. The manufacturer during World War II made 48,000 of these. They were probably given to a lot of the Navy personnel in the Pacific War because they're a night vision scope. Right? I have reason to believe that a lot of these metascopes, Navy metascopes, not Army metascopes, were possibly worked on in the optics shop at the top of Building 3, which is apparently lined with lead. So in the STM, the 2014 STM, they discuss the foils and they dismiss the metascope theory by actually confusing the Army metascope, the Army metascope, which had a gold foil, with the Navy metascope, which is a different animal altogether, different piece of equipment.
Okay,
So why did you guys do that? You confused Army equipment with Navy equipment in order to dismiss the theory that the metascopes, the Navy metascopes, are the source for these radioactive foils. And out of the 700, the 600, you had about 80 foils. It's a good percentage. And some of those had surface radioactivity sufficient to burn the skin in 10 minutes contact. Now, if these things are still buried, and you're still finding more of them, and the water table is so high that how can you know without digging out all the way down to the old water table? I mean, look, the ground surface, when they built the island, was 15 feet, right? What is it now? And then the last question I have had to do with They were
So-
supposed to
so
bring
wait,
in
so-
dirt to, when they were building the housing, it was gravel out on Site 12, it was mostly a parking lot for Golden Gate International Exposition. And they said they're gonna bring in 2 feet of dirt. Well, there's not 2 feet of dirt in my backyard. I'm just curious, I couldn't get a profile from any of these documents to say when they were excavating, how much actual topsoil is there above the gravel, above the aggregate?
So you had 3 questions.
Yes.
The first one was about the being able to
The
monitor.
completeness of the
completeness of it. The second one was about the ability to understand if there's radiological material through the water.
Right,
And the
tension.
third one was how deep. So-
How deep is the, could it be buried, right? So when the
So-
Navy was here, they could have buried things quite a lot deeper because they were working from a higher
Water
ground level,
table,
right? The water table was relatively lower because
Right.
there's been subsidence and compaction since then. I'm just
Yes.
curious,
Okay,
right?
so-
You said that there's actually,
So
you
So,
said there was
sir,
actually, you dug 12, as much as 12 feet down?
so,
And then
sir,
put it-
sir, so your questions are very well formed. And so I think we need to give the Navy a chance to either
Absolutely.
look into that and figure out whether or not, what you're saying, how to figure out how to answer your question.
Sure, and.
Because I'd prefer you not have a knee-jerk reaction, but really give a thoughtful, informed answer to that. Because there's a couple of things on there that he's referring to certain reports, and unless you're intimately familiar with
Dave
them.
knows a lot. He can answer
Well,
that now.
So-
Mr. Klein has some good points, and I can give a statement about it that, just for everyone that's here tonight.
Okay, thank you,
The,
Mr. Klein.
Mr. Klein is correct that this was a training facility and the foils were recovered. We may not ever know exactly what they were used for, but as you mentioned, they were probably part of some instrument, right? And where we find them is important because what we call the conceptual site model is different for different areas of the housing area. In the open spaces, we know that you can only find the foils as deep as some of the grading for the construction. And that's important because the deepest the grading went was about 3 to 4 feet. And we actually have empirical data. We actually went out there and we were able to find these foils at that depth within this fill material. So we actually know we can find them because we've gone out there with the instruments, we found them, and so we've demonstrated that despite the varying conditions of the groundwater, you can actually see these objects, and we feel we've recovered all of the objects in the open space, especially the foils. The other part of the housing area are the solid waste disposal areas, and these are different because they're deeper. And you're right, you cannot see down 12 feet into these solid waste disposal areas. West Side Drive is the primary one. So what we do there is different than the open spaces. In that situation, the way to remove them is quite simple. You can excavate them if you want to get rid of them as deep as the debris would go. So I think it's an important point to realize that yes, the foils may not exactly know what they were used for, but we're confident that they've been recovered in the housing areas in the open space, and we're currently evaluating other alternatives to recover them in the solid waste disposal area, such as excavation. So I hope that sort of gives an answer to the 3 main points of the question.
Is there some place that this is written up definitively on the website, Dave?
The website, the discussion about the foils, as Mr. Klein pointed out, is the tech memo. And then the recovery of the other objects throughout the years are in various reports.
Okay. So perhaps if you could talk with Mr. Klein later about which reports that might be in.
It goes, yes, it goes back
verify.
to, there's several reports, and as Carol mentioned, there is no summary report at this time to pull them all together.
Okay.
Am I
All right,
allowed
thank you for
a
that.
follow-up question?
One more, Mr. Klein, and then we're moving on.
There was a Shaw commodity inventory from 2012. Is there an updated inventory that accounts for all of the 1,280 radioactive objects? And what kind of testing has been done? What are the characteristics? Is that a report available? I know it's been requested, and I'm just wondering if it's been made available. Thank you.
So as you mentioned, the original, well, one of the original lists was in the tech memo from 2014.
Right.
Since then, the majority of the work was in an excavation, and that report recently came out, and we call that the phase 3 of the non-time critical removal action. So there is another table in that document about the other half, basically, of the table, but there's no one complete table at this time.
All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Clark.